Hello and welcome. I am John Najarian, and it is my great pleasure to welcome good friend Kevin OLeary back to the show, along with Robert Barrow, who is the CEO of MindMed. And I know we all like elephant hunting, Kev, and this one might be one of those elephants out there. I mean, last time, folks, just to refresh your memories, that Kevin brought us MindMed. It was I think a 35-cent stock, Kevin. And because of the potential of the company, it popped up over $5 a share over the next several months. And now, as things have settled back and the stock is looking like maybe it's anticipating another move like that, we wanted to welcome you back because you're a longtime investor and supporter of MindMed, as well as the new, at least new to me, CEO Robert Barrow. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks so much, John.
Kevin, maybe tell us just a little bit. I know for people that saw the first time we did a discussion on this, this was something you had doubts about. You liked the idea, but you wondered, would the government come after you for investing in a company that's microdosing with psychedelics and so forth? Tell me how you got over.
I was worried about that initially, but the difference between this and the cannabis story is there's no recreational option here. This company is not pursuing recreational drugs. They're looking for medicinal options from these molecules and going through the FDA process of trials, which is pure medicine. And so it's really a binary bet. You're an investor. There's been billions raised in this sector because people are very optimistic about the anecdotal outcomes that are starting to emerge on microdosing, both LSD and psilocybins. And I think Robert could talk a little bit about this, but you're betting on medicine, and you're talking about outcomes that are so expensive to society that these are really huge binary outcomes. If you solve for drug addiction or opioid addiction, if you solve for ADD, if you solve for anxiety, they're massive markets. They're huge. And so that's what this whole industry is trying to do. And there's, MindMed is one of three large entities that have raised capital together. What I like about MindMed is they have so many different trials going on. So you're getting a lot of diversification in terms of your risk, because when you're developing medicines from scratch, the outcomes are always unknown. And then you just need one big winner and you've justified the risk you took. And that's sort of the situation we're in with MindMed. And I'm still a shareholder, obviously, and I'm waiting for these trials to determine which of these drugs are going to make it to finally to medicine. So we're getting into the second stage, which is very exciting, and Robert can talk about that.
Yeah, well, and in full disclosure, folks, I was an investor, rode that wave with Kevin and the other investors, and did take some profits, but I have gotten back in a pretty big way for me, perhaps not as big as Mr. Wonderful, but probably somewhere between Robert Harvack and Mr. Wonderful, that kind of size. In other words, not all the way up there with Mr. Wonderful. But I do support what you're doing, Robert. I know a lot of servicemen and women and first responders are certainly anxious for something that could be as big a breakthrough as what Kevin just described. So if you wouldn't mind telling folks now that you're running the company exactly what you guys are focused on most and what kind of news we should be looking for from the company.
Absolutely. I think Kevin hit on it very well. We all know that there's a mental health and an opioid epidemic in this country. And I think the treatments, while several of them are beneficial, they're inadequate. There's a huge unmet need. And we believe that the psychedelic renaissance, what we've seen over the last many years, what MindMed is at the forefront of, is essential at really overhauling the entire mental health landscape and bringing entirely new paradigm to the treatment of mental health conditions. So at MindMed, what we're building is a neuroscience powerhouse organization, one that's going to compete not just in the psychedelic sector, but more broadly in the treatment of mental health and the entire field of medicine. And really the first step along that process is getting into clinical trials, accelerating our development programs, getting these one step closer to FDA and other regulatory approvals. And in the months ahead, we have several exciting clinical trials, LSD, high doses and repeat low doses. I have a molecule called 18MC, which is a non-hallucinogenic analog or sister molecule, you could say, of a classic psychedelic called ibogaine, and a number of other programs that are at various stages of development that give us really the most compelling, the most advanced clinical trial pipeline of anyone in the psychedelic sector. We're really excited about taking this next step as we go into 2022.
Yeah, and I guess, Kev, just like when you and I are talking about a biotech or a pharmaceutical company, and they've got FDA trials going on, the time when you get that most bang for your buck is before that approval happens. Because when the approval happens, all of a sudden you get this, moonshot or hockey stick when you get that approval. That has to be, I know you're a guy that likes, that you've spoken at Grant Cardone events where he talks about 10X, but you're more of a 100X kind of guy, which is one of the things I love about you, is that you're looking for those big winners. And I think something like in this space, whether it's microdosing, LSD.
Yeah, you would be investing in MindMed and this whole sector as binary outcomes, because I keep going back to the original investment thesis when I got involved. We haven't really developed new medicines for these years. For opioid addiction, we give people opioids. That's kind of crazy, and it's really bad outcomes. And we have all these horrible drugs that try and solve for depression or ADD or anxiety that are they're not great. And so the fact that there's no innovation, and LSD was being used in the early 60s, and there were some real medicine trials being contemplated, but then the drug got abused and overdosed essentially, and became part of folk culture. The army did some bad things with it. Everybody knows that. Back with this original molecule, saying, wait a second, let's look at the merits of this, because we've found nothing better, like nothing else has solved. So for me, this is really a long journey. You have to take a longer view, but it's as you say, that when you start getting approvals through the FDA process, because the anecdotal information looks interesting, and then your actual clinical data comes in, these are really big outcomes if you're right. And so in your portfolio, there's nothing wrong with taking this kind of a position, understanding, you don't bet the farm, but you put something to work, as I've done. And I'm waiting. I'm like, I own a lot of stock in this company because I think one of these trials is going to work.
Mm-hmm. And Robert, when you guys are talking about the sorts of labs that are working with you right now, because some of it's being work that you guys are doing, but I believe in the past it was like John Hopkins and some others that were actually working with you guys, which is huge endorsement, obviously. Can you tell the audience a little bit about who some of those hospitals and or labs that you're working with are?
Absolutely. So we have a number of collaborations and members of our scientific advisory board throughout the organization, connections to the leading centers in psychiatric research, leading centers in abuse and substance use disorders and research in those areas. We also have a huge collaboration with Dr. Matthias Liechti at University Hospital Basel, who's been conducting research on psychedelics for well over a decade, and is really one of the thought leaders worldwide in this area. So you look at the institutions where centers have been forming for psychedelics, they're the likes of Yale, of New York University, of Johns Hopkins, UCSF, Imperial College London. These are powerhouse organizations, powerhouse academic institutions who are throwing their full weight behind this opportunity. And I think all of us are united in seeing the real potential to completely overhaul the treatment of mental health disorders and really shepherd in a whole new paradigm of treating these conditions.
I know from the past that the veterans in particular that come back with and are afflicted with PTSD, and that could also be first responders domestically here. What area do you work with these folks in? Are you able to go, for instance, in any of these VA hospitals and work with those folks, or where do you work with folks that you're testing out, how they react to the treatments that you guys can provide?
Absolutely. So many organizations, including MindMed, we see an enormous burden of mental health, both PTSD, but also depression and anxiety in our service members and in first responders and anyone who is exposed to the level of trauma and challenges that those in those professions are. We engage very broadly all of our studies around the world. Here in the US, we go across the country and really target areas where we do see an increased incidence of these conditions. The exact organizations we work with, and there's some obviously some administrative hurdles of getting through large organizations like the VA for conducting clinical trials, particularly with Schedule I controlled substances. But we certainly have a number of relationships, a number of partners and collaborators who either work at the VA or have connections there, who ultimately are going out and seeking patients. And I think one of the most impactful things I've seen in this industry has been the pull from those patients, from the service providers, servicemen and women who have these conditions and are ultimately coming to us, sharing the desire, sharing the need, and seeking out every opportunity they can to engage and be part of this. So we do see an enormous connection to the organizations, but also to the individual patients who need these therapies more than anyone.
I know we only have Kevin for a few more minutes, Robert, so I'm just going to throw one out to you, Kevin. Do you hold any board positions or anything, or are you just a much bigger shareholder than me when it comes to MindMed?
My largest position, I index these companies to get diversity of all the trials. So I own some Compass and a tie as well. But I index by trials. So because none of them have advanced anything to market yet. So my largest MindMed because they have more trials than anybody else. And do it. So if you're going to take diversity across the platforms, it's a personal opinion, I'd over else, which is what MindMed is. So it's my largest position in the sector, but I also own the other two. And there are many other companies doing. Generally, when you get an oligopoly of capital, and that's exactly what, if there's any exciting molecules being developed by the smaller players, they probably get acquired by one of these three companies. That's the way I look at it. And so I'm a big believer in the space and just riding the wave, waiting for the outcomes. And that's the way you got to do it in biotech. That's exactly the way you do it. You get diversity and you wait.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. Like I say, I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've got to do another TV hit. But if it's okay, I'll just stay on with Robert for a few more minutes.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Robert, obviously, they were able to attract you from a career that was in the pharmaceutical industry, where you had worked extensively with psychedelics and things like that. I was reading in the press release that you got your degree in pharmacology, I believe it was, from Ohio State University, and then went on to be the CEO of a couple other, was it OLeary Therapeutics or something like that?
Yeah, so I spent about 10 years as the chief operating officer of OLeary Therapeutics, which was a private clinical stage pharmaceutical company developing really interesting molecules as well. Ultimately had the opportunity to transition into the psychedelic area, and an organization called USONA Institute that's working on psilocybin. So I was there. I took a program that was on clinical hold, came out of clinical hold, got a breakthrough therapy designation, really got deeply involved and committed to what we're doing and seeing the opportunity in this space. But ultimately, when you look at what's needed to get drugs across the finish line, it is building an organization that can compete in the pharmaceutical space, that isn't seeing the world narrowly through a psychedelic angle. And that's the opportunity to come on to MindMed at the beginning of this year. It was something I really couldn't turn down, really, seeing the opportunity, seeing the passion of the people here, and having the shared vision of how big and ambitious we need to be and must be if we're going to be successful and have the kind of impact. The opportunity in front of us is enormous. It's world-changing, and it deserves the professional organization. It deserves the people and the approach that we're taking here at MindMed. And we've been, the thing I'm most proud of internally so far is the extraordinary talent we've been able to attract out of big pharma, out of mid-sized pharma. I mean, these are incredible, talented individuals who left very high trajectory, stable careers in pharma to come and work on this unique opportunity. So we've never been in a better position, and And myself and everyone here in the organization are fully committed and throwing our entirety behind the mission here to bring these products to market.
Well, and one of the things I think, as exciting, of course, as that is, Robert, but one of the things that I think is also both necessary and perhaps overlooked is the purity of what you guys are using versus what somebody that reads about something that happened with a kid somewhere or with an adult with a LSD or a psilocybin, where they didn't really know completely what was in it. You guys are using, if you will, medical grade. This isn't something that you're buying on the street, which unfortunately a lot of the psychedelic industry, I think people kind of chuckle when they hear it and they say, well, it just depends where they got it or whatever. But this is pharmaceutical grade, if I could call it that, of whatever compound that you guys are using, whether it's psilocybin, LSD, peyote, whatever it might be. It's as pure as it could be, rather than something that might be cut with something or put together by somebody who didn't quite do it right.
That's exactly right. I think it's really an important point here, is that this is not anything to do with recreational use or anything to do with what you might come across in everyday life. This is drug development through and through. I think that the leadership we've brought in to our pharmaceutical development organization, who oversees the manufacturing and ultimately the creation of the medicines that we take into the clinic. It's a team with a long track record of doing incredible things in the pharmaceutical industry. Many of them come out of AstraZeneca, have incredible expertise, know-how. We drive high purity products. We also know from our own work that, and from what's in the literature even, LSD, for instance, is not a particularly stable molecule. So we also have innovations to make it perform better, to make it more pure, to make it the kind of product that ultimately can actually get into the market and become reimbursed and become a medicine that you get prescribed by your physician. So it is a whole different game, and a very, very well-controlled, highly technical, highly professional operation that we have to put in place. And that's why we're building the organization the way we are, is because we can't afford any missteps here. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we have to do it the right way.
Right. Well, and it certainly seems like you are. I was listening to a broadcast with Joe Rogan not too long ago, where he had a comedian on, Ron White, and Ron had gone down to Costa Rica and was trying to break an alcohol addiction with ayahuasca, going through a series of, I guess, a regimen of about 5 days to try to do that. And he said he did over those 5 days and so forth. Is that also one of the substances that at some point you guys would look at? Because I hear about that a lot, ayahuasca, but I haven't read about it with any of the other, with Compass or anybody else in your field.
Yes, so it's important to note that ayahuasca is really a mixture of multiple molecules. So DMT is the actual active molecule, and it's co-administered with effectively a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which are an old class of antidepressant drugs. So it's those co-administered, and it prolongs the activity of DMT. DMT is metabolized very quickly. We have an investigator-initiated study ongoing with DMT and our colleagues at UHB in Switzerland. We're very interested in looking at the shorter acting psychedelics and novel derivatives of those shorter acting psychedelics. So ayahuasca in and of itself is probably a product that's going to be quite difficult for anyone to develop because of the complexities of having multiple drugs, and in particular ayahuasca itself being a natural extract that presents its own regulatory challenges. But we are very interested. It's important to note that anytime you hear of these basic hallucinogens or psychedelics, they're all very, very structurally similar. So DMT and psilocybin have very similar chemical structures, and they behave in somewhat similar ways. They have different activities slightly, they perform slightly differently, but certainly all of that evidence that we hear anecdotally, hear observationally out in the world is very informative, is very useful in giving us direction and DMT and the other shorter acting molecules are something of great interest to us in the long run.
Well, anything before we say thank you very much for your time today, Robert? Is there anything in the short term that the FDA or anybody else has said, hey, we're getting pretty close on this particular test or that protocol that you guys have going on? Or I know you're a publicly traded organization, so you can't say certain things, but has the guidance been positive on anything you can tell us about?
Well, certainly we're really excited about where we are and where we're going. And that in particular, one of the big regulatory milestones, one of the big development milestones is actually starting your clinical trials. And that's something we've been talking about for the majority of this year, is getting these trials, these phase 2 programs up and running. And that's LSD and general anxiety disorder, LSD and adult ADHD, and our 18-MC molecule for opioid withdrawal. In the months ahead, all of those trials are scheduled to initiate, and we've made very publicly stated that all of those are moving very quickly into phase 2 programs, the LSD programs by the end of this year. So we're really excited about that milestone in the near term. And then once we're in the clinic, it's pushing those programs, those clinical trials to completion, getting data readouts, and then going to FDA and saying, here is our direct shot on goal to get these across the finish line.
Robert Barrow, CEO of MindMed, symbol, by the way, MMED.NE. That's N like, well, it's basically the abbreviation for Nebraska. I hate to tell that to a guy from Ohio State, but since Nebraska's been sort of fallen off on the college football scene, you probably don't mind that so much. But Robert, thank you very much for your time today, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.